nors kainos yra aukštai, bet joms kilti iki neracionalių aukštumų dar yra kur.
The problem, of course, is emotion going the other way and saying, well, let me just raise my risk tolerance because the world seems a little bit safer now. That's always the key mistake.
And I would be continuing searching for interesting investment opportunities, especially within the correction on the volatility, which could happen due to geopolitical risk and macro risks. But overall, I'm cautiously optimistic.
Turint galvoj visas aplinkybės, kurios vyko praėjusiais metais, tai mano vertinimu 14 buvo ypatingai geri metai, nes nepaisant visų šokų ir negerovių, kurios įvyko pasaulyje per tuos metus, finansų rinkos joms pavyko atsilaikyti ganėtinai sėkmingai ir nepaisant labai trumpų korekcijų vis dėlto akcijom pakilti į naujas rekordinės aukštumas. Tuo tarpu obligacijų palūkanom atrodytų jau nebeturint kur trauktis, joms dar labiau sumažėti ir tuo pačiu pakelti investicijų obligacijas vertę. Na ir lygiai taip pat probleminių regionų, galbūt skyrus tuos, kurie atsidūrė politinių neramumų epicentre, visų aplinkinių regionų akcijom vis dėlto pavyko gana sėkmingai pergyventi tos neramumus.
I think it's been a mix of the year. I mean, it started actually quite well in the first half of the 2014, and especially the equity markets. If we look both U.S. Europe, I mean, the start of the year were quite good and optimistic actually. The economic data were still pointing to the European recovery at the time. People were hoping. U.S. data, despite the first quarter, continued to be the strong. So investors, took quite a lot of optimism in the first half. Then we saw a little bit of a bumpy ride towards the sort of third quarter of the year, and we saw a little bit of small correction in sort of September-October timeframe. The reason is obviously the still continuing, let's say, economic problems in Eurozone, if you call that, because Eurozone is still flirting with recession, and that's the key concern to investors. Coupled with a few geopolitical issues, obviously we have Russia-Ukraine situation, we had Ebola virus, we had Middle East, of course, situation coming into the foray. So combined with geopolitical risks that were emerging, especially from summertime towards the third quarter, and also the deteriorating economic data in Eurozone particularly, I think sort of damped that optimism, and we saw some of the investors sort of selling the equities and getting out of the market and so on. So obviously I would say it's still a good year. If we look at the S&P index, for example, up to year to date, it's still about 10% up. So it's not that bad, but it's, last year was 30% up for the whole year. So it's still double-digit return, but if you look at the FTSE 100, which is the UK London Stock Exchange index for largest 100 companies, it's about only 3% up. Some of the emerging markets actually are down for the year.
Kalbant apie prognozes, aš būčiau linkęs sakyti, kad reikėtų tikėtis netikėtumų. Tai yra, mes šiemet turbūt jau patyrėme nemažai netikėtumų, kurie visai laimiai nesukėlė didelių krizių. Tačiau kas gali pasakyti, kad panašus netikėtumai ar visiškai tokie, kurių mes nesitikime, neišjudins sistemos stabilumo kitais metais. O sistema, kuo aukščiau kyla kainos, juo tuo jinai darosi nestabilesnė. Ir šiemet turbūt metų pabaigoje jinai dar mažiau stabili, negu kad jinai buvo prieš metus, ar dar prieš 2 metus. Tai šitoj vietoj sakyčiau, kad jautrumas pačios visos finansų sistemos yra išaugęs ir kada ateis tas trigeris, kuris pajudins visą tą kortų namelį, tai yra tik laiko klausimas. Didžiausia rizika kelia ne pats įvykis, kuris galėtų įvykti, bet greičiau pats kainų lygis, kuriame yra atsidūrusios rinkos. Tai yra, jeigu kalbėsime apie pačias populiariausias rinkas, tai skolos ir akcijų rinkas, tai jos pagal daugybę istorinių parametrų, istorinių vidurkių yra savo aukštumose. Ir čia tas įvykis gali būti gal labai ir nedidelis, kuris sukeltų kažkokią tai griūtį. Užtektų turbūt kažkokios finansų institucijos galbūt kolapso, ar ne? Kuri patrauktų paskui save visą įvykių grandinę, taip kaip įvyko 2008-aisiais. Aš gink-die neprognozuoju, kad tai atsitiks 2015-ais, bet rizikos tam yra.
several big factors that will determine major outlook for the 2015, and we're seeing these risk factors right now in play. So depending how these risk factors will evolve towards the end of the year, and let's say the first quarter of 2015, that's going to set the tone for a lot of investment themes as well. So one is the geopolitical risk. That's definitely the big question. And here you have several geopolitical risks. One is continued obviously conflict of Russia and Ukraine, which affects obviously a lot of European markets. It affects a lot of investment into Russia. So obviously that puts the sentiment definitely towards the negative side. It's still a big risk at the moment. Another one is Middle East. I mean, depends how it destabilizes. Here, I think the question is of oil prices. I mean, whether it is destabilization of the oil supply to the markets, and obviously that will, with growing oil prices again, will have the inflationary effects, but also will have the let's say the dampening of the consumer, spending power and that sort of thing. That's going to be affecting the that side of the world. Let's say that, and then the Europe, not as a geopolitical risk, but as a macro risk, remains on investors' minds for the moment. And here, I think the biggest countries like Italy, Germany, and France have to show willingness to do some of the reforms in the markets. Things like labor reforms are very important. Places like Italy and France. And also stimulus.
I think the risk of the Fed raising rates has been somewhat already priced into the market. Will it have an impact? Of course it will. I do believe, my personal opinion is that it will be towards the later end of expectations. I think that they're going to wait a little while to allow the economy to get up ahead of steam. And when the rates do rise, well, that again, it just provides different opportunities. I certainly think there's scope for the US market to continue to grow and grow at some pace. What I would say is a broad brush approach of let's just put money in the US probably isn't going to yield as well as a more targeted approach of looking at those sectors and making sure you've got your cyclical, your counter-cyclical balances to be able to take advantage of the strengths of the US economy rather than just going in and saying I'll invest in the US. In terms of the US sectors which I think are quite interesting, particularly the healthcare sector has been battered somewhat over the past few years with obviously the much publicised Obamacare. However, I think that will provide some opportunities because innovative healthcare companies who are not burdened by the past which the current incumbents in that sector have weighing on them, new entrants who can be innovative in the provision of healthcare, working within the framework of Obamacare, I think there'll be very interesting opportunities in that sector, and I think it's something to watch out for over the next 5 to 10 years. Another area is connected to that, which is biotechnology. The US has always led the biotech market, and if we're looking at global developments, the biotech industry is going to become more and more key to the progression of lots of various markets when it comes to how it helps develop medicine and lots of other areas of industry. I feel that biotech will have multiple applications in lots of different industries, and therefore, as an industry in itself, there probably are some interesting opportunities there. And then finally, the technology sector. Technology is obviously a given when it comes to the US, but I do believe that there is more to come because it has the base, it has the infrastructure.
Turbūt derėtų nepasikliauti kažkokią bendrą turto klase kaip visumą, kad sakyt, akcijos turbūt yra tas daiktas, į kurį reiktų investuoti. Netgi pasakęs, kad jos yra brangios kaip visuma, vis dėlto turbūt yra įmonių, kurių akcijos kainuoja pigiai, kurios yra atsparios, kurios galbūt nėra tiek cikliškos ir panašiai. Kita vertus, kai visa rinka yra brangi, turbūt surasti tokių perliukų darosi vis sunkiau ir sunkiau. Ir dažniausiai tos, kurios yra pigios, jos yra pigios dėl labai rimtų priežasčių. Tai šitoj vietoj, ką daugelis, turbūt racionalių investuotojų šiandien dieną ir stengiasi daryti, tai yra ieškoti kažkokių alternatyvų tom nusistovėjusiam turto klasėm, tam vadinamam mainstreamui, kuris galbūt šiandien dienai yra pakilęs į pakankamai aukštas aukštumas. Tai yra ieškoti instrumentų ar priemonių, kurios nebūtų tiek glaudžiai susijusios su bendra finansų rinkų judėjimo kryptimi. Sritis čia gali būti pačios įvairiausios, pradedant turbūt nelistinguojamais instrumentais, ar ne, kurie galbūt nėra jautrus rinkos svyravimam, nes kiekvieną dieną kažkas neateina ir nesako, kad kaina šiandien pasikeitė minus tiek ar plius tiek ir tai nesukuria psichologinio kažkokio tai noro pardavinėti ar atsikratyti tos investicijos, o greičiau išlaukti to termino, kuris yra numatytas. Tai disciplinuoja tam tikrą prasme. Kita vertus, galimos investicijos į kažkokias turto klases, tokios kaip, tas pats gerai žinomas nekilnojamas turtas, ar ne? Galimos investicijos į rinkas, kurios galbūt šiandien dienai yra suprantamos kaip pernelyg rizikingos ir tenai ieškoti tų instrumentų ar tų priemonių, kurios būtų atsparios kažkokiom tai problemom, ar ne? Tai jeigu šiandien mes netgi paimkime savo namų rinką, Baltijos rinkas, ar ne, tas pačias akcijas Baltijos rinkose, kurios teoriškai galėtų nukentėti nuo konfrontacijos su Rusija, tačiau tam tikrų momentų turbūt kainom sumažėjus, jeigu pažiūrėti į kažkokį ilgesnį laiką, įmonės, kurios yra stiprios, kurios gali savo produktą perorientuoti iš vienų rinkų į kitas, jos greičiausiai išliks ir jų įsigijimas būtų naudingas tomis sąlygomis, kai nieks nenori jų pirkti.
Yeah, currencies is another one. It's very interesting as well. Here, I think at least there is some visibility what's happening, because obviously the central bank policies influence the outlook on the currencies. Current deficits influence outlook on the currency. So I think we've been seeing the strengthening of the US dollar. That's going to be continuing for next year, and probably further depreciation of euro a little bit to the dollar potentially, depending again on the some of the macro data that will come out of Europe. Again, how to manage these risks, investors will have to take a look in terms of the weights. So for today, if you ask me, my advice, definitely I would say being more overweight in the US dollar and a little bit more underweight in euro would be the right sort of currency balance in terms of both investments and pure, currency holdings. The reason not to invest is basically to wait until, let's say, market correction happens and to invest in the undervalued assets at the time, or looking for that particular lucrative investment. So I think not being invested in volatile markets is not a bad thing. Waiting for the good correction and coming in at the right, or at least thinking at the right moment would be a good thinking. Taking an example of Russian market, Russian MSCI Russia is trading at the lowest PE index of all the emerging markets. It's below five times PE ratio. It's historically the lowest. But with the signs of stabilization, let's say in the geopolitical arena, if there is some sort of stabilization, if the let's say the warm up in the relationship between West and Russia will start happening, coming early into these markets will be a great opportunity. So again, the reason not to be invested for the moment in these markets in 2015, it's a good time to wait through until all this turmoil happens and seeing how the geopolitical environment develops as well as the economic environment. But coming in the emerging markets at a later stage could provide very good returns for investors, I believe.
Neiti į labai saugiomis laikomas obligacijas, ne, ten valstybių, reiškia Europos ar JAV obligacijas, nes ta turto klasė, mano supratimu, tikrai išsemia savo galimybės. Kita vertus, ar jam reikėtų eiti į akcijas šiandienai? Pasakant apskritai, galimai taip, tačiau jis turėtų būti labai atsargus ir jeigu jis yra tikrai aktyvus ir gali atsirinkti daiktus, į kuriuos investuoti, tai yra atsirinkti regioną, atsirinkti konkrečią įmonę ir panašiai, turbūt jisai gali uždirbti pinigus ir ateityje. Jeigu jis investuoja pasyviai, tai yra perka akcijas kaip turto klasę, tarkim, per indekso fondą ar panašiai, tada aš manyčiau, kad jo tokia investicija einant tolyn į priekį darosi labai rizikinga.
Where should your money be in 2015? Well, I definitely believe your money should be invested somewhere.
I would say definitely there are reasons not to be invested in 2015, and we talked about these factors, risk factors, but at the same time, the situation is not that bad. We're not at the sort of, at the edge of some sort of big catastrophe or the big correction.
Šitame etape jau nebėra tų pigių priešpečių, kurios galima labai lengvai gauti.